So, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us at this webinar. This is a follow-up session with regard to research data management. The previous session was as organized by the School of Postgraduate Studies when we discussed the creation of data management planning. In this case, we are going to look at research data management again, with a few additional points, and then which will be done by, so the presentation will be done by Sarah Schafer, and following her presentation, I'll be looking at how you upload your research data to Kikapu, which is our research data management repository. So thank you once again. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and that being said, welcome, Sarah, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. One of the joys of working from home is that I currently have a very loud truck outside my window, but it's going to be gone in about a minute. And then there we go, it's going. Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. I'm Sarah Schafer. I work at the eResearch office and I collaborate closely with Mark at the library. I'm an RDM specialist. And I'm going to be introducing research data management and Kikapu. So thanks everyone for joining on this cold morning. I'm going to turn my video off and start my presentation. Okay, I hope that everyone can see that. I'm not going to keep tabs on the chat while I'm talking. So if there are questions or if there's a problem and you need to interrupt me, please do so. Great. Okay, this is
Sarah, sorry,
yeah?
we can see your presentation, so thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. A brief overview of what I'm going to be introducing today. Before I launch into research data management, I'm going to start taking a little step back. So I don't need to be the person to tell any of you that research is important for a million different reasons. As a researcher, you are contributing to the knowledge economy of South Africa and of the world globally. As the management of research data has become a part of the research process, and it affects the quality of the research outcome. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with some of the content that I'm going to be going through, but I think it's useful to look at it all as a whole before going into more detail about data management and sharing data. So we're going to start by looking at the research lifecycle. This is a really simplified lifecycle diagram, but you can see that the process of research usually follows a sequential path. Starting at the top with idea discovery or the generation of a hypothesis. This is followed by an approval stage, where researchers would look for funding and get approval. Next is the active research phase, the conducting research, followed by dissemination and sharing results. After dissemination, new ideas will be formed and the cycle begins again. As all of you researchers know, this is a simplified diagram, but it will hopefully serve its purpose here. Now we need to ask, where in the cycle does data come into the picture? It's not only at the conducting research stage, even though that may be when most of the data will be generated. Data is actually present at every step of the life cycle shown here. So during the idea discovery phase, the researcher decides on the way the data will be collected and what data instruments will be used. This is the planning stage, and it's where researchers decide on their instruments and populations, etc. They're planning for the data. During funding and approval, the researcher focuses on the costs of data collection and data storage. This is the proposal or grant approval stage. And it's where the researcher starts thinking about the costs of collection and storage. During conducting research, the researcher will collect the data, store it, and analyze it. This is the active phase of research, so a lot of the data work happens here. During dissemination, the researcher should publish and share the data in a repository and make it available with a license for other researchers to view and reuse. This shows that data needs attention throughout the research lifecycle. It's not something that should simply be touched once because it's a funder or a publisher requirement. It's also important that data is managed throughout the research lifecycle, not only thought about, but actively managed. So we're going to take another step backwards. What is data? We can see at the bottom of this triangle, known as the DIKW triangle, we can see data right at the bottom. It is information at its most basic. This is known as the knowledge hierarchy model. And we can see that data is the very foundation. It is unrefined information. On its own, data does not necessarily have meaning. It needs to be processed. And this is why it forms the basis for information, knowledge, and wisdom. Now, what is research data? Research data is simply data that is being used for the sake of research. This includes data that is derived from observation or from experiments, from interviews, from testing hypotheses, from surveys, etc. It can be qualitative or quantitative. Data can include data sets and spreadsheets. It can include numbers. It can include opinions or interviews. Some data can be recollected and other kinds can't be. For example, observations can't be simply recollected, but carefully conducted lab experiments can be. Different disciplines collect different types of data. Sharing research data encourages more connection and collaboration between researchers, and this can result in important new findings and collaborations. It also makes it easier for other researchers to replicate your findings and explore new paths of knowledge. We're going to look at one more lifecycle model, and this is the research data lifecycle. Hopefully, this will illustrate how research data fits into the research process and how it also has a cycle of its own. As you can see again, it's simplified, but it shows the sequential nature of the cycle of research data, from planning research at the top and moving clockwise to reusing data. We're going to quickly look at the activities that relate to each stage of this life cycle. The first stage is planning research. Researchers need to start planning for the management of their data. This includes their proposal, thinking about their paradigm, their approaches, their methodology, their costs. It also includes data management planning. And these specify what data will be produced, the methodologies, the plans for storage and access and preservation, documentation, restrictions, ethics. It's all about being completely upfront about your research data plans, bearing in mind that they can change and that's completely fine, but thinking about them from the beginning is what's important. The active research stage takes place over the second and third phases here and includes collecting, processing, and analysis. In these two phases, using local storage that is secure and reliable, it's ensuring that there are regular backups, it's using file formats that are widely used for the sake of later sharing, and focusing on formats that are non-proprietary and open. In this phase, you'll go through file names and versioning that are descriptive and consistent, a folder structure that is logical, and descriptive metadata. The next phase, sharing and publishing data. This is where using a repository like Kikapu starts to come in. This is where the researcher deposits to appropriate repositories or data centers. This is also where data would be anonymized if needed. It's where you would define access terms and conditions and identify embargoes and choose a license that is as open as possible. Next phase is preserving. It's choosing which data you will retain, choosing a logical and secure home that will ensure accessibility and preservation, authenticity and integrity. Again, this is where a repository like Kikapu would come in. The last phase, reusing data. Well, it's discovering, reuse, and citation. It's having a unique identifier known as a persistent identifier, or a DOI, a digital object identifier, would be assigned, where you would track access to the data and provide recommending citations. So sorry about that, quick screen problem. Okay, so now we've gone through the two lifecycle models. I'm now going to jump into research data management. Research data management concerns the active management and appraisal of data, from its entry in the research lifecycle through to the dissemination and archiving of results. Good research data management, I'm going to call it RDM from here. Good RDM is an essential part of research, and it's becoming more and more relevant and necessary. RDM is important to the ongoing production and dissemination of knowledge, as well as the global research agenda and South Africa's research agenda. A DMP, or a data management plan, is a document that formalizes a researcher's RDM strategy. Researchers are expected to practice good RDM and to use RDM tools in order to streamline their workflows and to make their research more efficient and more visible. Sharing research data is an integral part of practicing good RDM. As I've shown with the previous lifecycle models, data have a longer lifespan than the research project that creates them. Researchers may continue to work on data after funding has ceased. Follow-up projects may analyze or add to the data, and data may be reused by other researchers. This use and reuse of data in future research is only possible when data is shared, when it's managed well, when it's properly preserved, and when it's made available. Well-organized, well-documented, preserved, and shared data are invaluable to advance scientific inquiry and to increase opportunities for learning and innovation. So as research becomes more open worldwide, data sharing across disciplines and fields is becoming the norm. So why share your research data? Data sharing benefits the researcher, the university, the researcher's funders, the scientific community, and the public at large. Data sharing is typically encouraged within the scientific community, but it requires effort, resources, and collaboration. And this is where the university's RDM team comes in. This is where we come in. There are tools and platforms that simplify the process for researchers, and using an institutional data repository like Kikapu is one of these tools. Sharing research data is a part of practicing good RDM. I do need to say that UWC does not mandate the use of Kikapu, but we strongly encourage it, and we are able to offer assistance and guidance and training with it. There are a few relevant policies that I'm going to mention here that are relevant to UWC researchers when it comes to data sharing. The first is our RDM policy. Other policies include funder policies, and I'll touch on the NRF here, although this also depends on each researcher and each researcher's funders. In a nutshell, UWC's RDM policies encourages all researchers at UWC to practice good RDM and to share their research data openly, or as openly as possible, using a repository like Kikapu. The general expectation is that publicly funded research data constitute a public good and should be made openly available. Submitting a DMP is also being incorporated into the research ethics approval process. Increasingly, publishers, international funders, and our own NRF require that research data supporting projects and publications be made publicly available. If a research project is publicly funded, then it needs to be made publicly available. In 2015 already, the NRF released a statement on open access, and it asserted that the results of publicly funded research should be published as open access. Moreover, the data supporting the research should be made available in an accredited open access data repository with the provision of DOIs for citation purposes. Again, a DOI is a digital object identifier, and I'm going to touch more on that shortly. Okay, when we're talking about open access, well, open access is integral to Kikapu, so I'm going to touch very briefly on this first. At its most simple, open access is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. This doesn't mean that you can't place some restrictions on data. It is possible for data to be private. More importantly, open access is in stark contrast to the traditional subscription model, where readers have access to scholarly information by paying a subscription. Open access encourages the use of CC or Creative Commons licenses. These licenses include completely open access, known as CC/BY, or open with attribution, known as CC/BY, or open with attribution and not for commercial use, known as CC/BY-NC. There are various kinds of Creative Commons licenses, and they don't all mean that everything has to be completely free and open. So UWC embraces the term as open as possible, as closed as necessary. Research outputs should be as open as possible, but control over access is also important. Research institutions around the world are actively embracing this age where information is no longer hidden behind paywalls and where information can be accessed and built upon. The Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities, just known as the Berlin Declaration, in October 2003, already nearly 20 years ago, is an international statement on open access and access to knowledge. It advocates for access to scientific research and cultural heritage. It addresses how the web offers the chance to constitute a global and interactive representation of human knowledge. UWC signed the Berlin Declaration to Open Access in 2013. Sharing research data openly encourages more connection and collaboration between researchers. That's the bottom line of open access. Okay, so moving on to Kikapu. What is Kikapu? Kikapu is UWC's institutional research data repository. It is powered by Figshare, and it is a cloud-based platform for securely publishing and sharing research data while making it discoverable and citable. As I said earlier, UWC doesn't mandate the use of Kikapu, but we strongly encourage it. It makes data curation far easier for researchers, and we can offer training and assistance where needed. All UWC students and staff can access the system with their novel credentials, so your regular login details. Like I said earlier, Kikapu is powered by Figshare for institutions, and it is what we call an instance of Figshare, which is a software as a service. Hundreds of universities and institutions around the world use instances of Figshare as their institutional data repositories. These include the Smithsonian at the University of Utrecht, Stockholm University, lots of local universities, including Western Cape one, Stellenbosch, CPUT, and UCT. Using Kikapu means that you can store your digital outputs in any file format. You can securely collaborate with researchers from other institutions. You can get a citable DOI for public outputs. You can demonstrate the impact that your research has with altmetrics and other usage metrics. It means that you can comply with your funder with open access, and you can help others discover outputs. Because it is a cloud-based system, material stored on Kikapu is accessible anywhere and anytime. More technically, the platform is ISO 27001 compliant. That means that it adheres to a framework of policies and procedures that include all legal and technical controls involved in an organization's information risk management processes. So it's of an excellent standard when it comes to security. Researchers can get a digital object identifier for uploaded digital objects. This is a persistent and unique link to data or a data set. DOIs are more permanent than URLs, and they ensure that the source will always be able to be reliably located. So what can be uploaded to Kikapu? Figshare is known for accepting any file format, and it strongly encourages the use of non-proprietary formats where possible. After you upload, publish, and accept the terms of deposit on Kikapu, your data or data set or file will go into review by a data curator before being published. File types that can be uploaded include images, audio files, 3D files, videos, text, code, posters, and presentations. And within these file types, Figshare prides itself on supporting all different file formats. Users don't just have to upload single files at a time, they can also create projects or collections. A project involves multiple collaborators. This is really useful, especially if there are collaborators from different institutions. You can invite that person to Kikapu, and it enables different layers of user permissions and privacy permissions. And collections can be used to showcase data from various users. Another useful feature is that you can create a group. Again, this would be done through one of the RDM teams, one of the data curators, and you can create a group within an institution, which is usually ideal for research groups or centers, because you can customize it to an extent. You can have your own logo or image used, and you can have your own URL. As I mentioned earlier, when we were speaking about open access, using Kikapu doesn't mean that all research data has to be completely open, but it rather means that we support all data being as open as possible, as closed as necessary. Data can still be made private, and it's possible to have a metadata only record. So here you can see an example of making data private. Using Kikapu makes it easier for researchers to make their data more open, and it also makes it easier for researchers to use what we refer to as the FAIR data principles. I'm going to quickly touch on those before I hand over to Mark. For data to be more open, there are 4 foundational principles that can be used as guidelines. They relate to data and metadata, and they are domain agnostic. They are known as FAIR. Okay, so findable is the F in FAIR. The findable principle is about making sure that data is stored with a persistent identifier, that is well described with rich metadata and indexed in as many relevant searchable resources as appropriate. So all data published through Kikapu are assigned a DOI, which aids discoverability in citation explorers. And all data is indexed by major search engines. And this includes Google Dataset Search, as well as community and national data registries. The A stands for accessible, and the accessible principle ensures that data can be accessed via standard non-proprietary protocols and that metadata is stored in perpetuity. It means that no data will ever be behind a paywall, and Figshare can support cases where data can't be made publicly available, but metadata will still be published. It can also integrate with various long-term preservation systems. The I stands for interoperable, and the interoperable principle promotes the use of formal, accessible, shared, and broadly accepted language for knowledge representation. The R is for reusable, and the reusable principle encourages researchers to upload metadata and data that is richly described to the domain relevant community standards. And it also means that all data and metadata on Figshare have a clear and accessible usage license attached to it. Okay, that sums up my introduction. And my colleague from the library, Mark Snyders, is going to take over from here. Thank you, and you can see the RDM support email address here, as well as my own. And there's more information about what I've spoken about on the eResearch website. I'm going to stop my sharing. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sarah. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to put the questions in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand. My apologies. I thought someone had raised their hands. It's actually mine. So please note that we're going to go through a live demonstration with regard to uploading research data to Kikapu. We do have a video available that was made by Sarah, and the link will be available in the chat for any reference purposes. And as indicated, does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to let us know. Okay, also as far as the session is concerned, if you have any questions afterwards, you're welcome to contact us as well. Please note that my email address is available in terms of the, when you registered for the repository, my details my apologies. When you registered for this webinar, my details became available. If you're not sure, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat quickly. Okay, there we go. For those of you who are on campus or are brave enough to venture onto the campus, my office is on the fourth floor in the library. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to turn off my video and then I'm going to share my screen. Can somebody let me know whether or not they can see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, excellent. So the web address at the top is Kikapu, K-I-P-A-U @uwc.ac.za. Please note that this is, as Sarah indicated, it is an online platform. However, in terms of access to this platform, it can really only be accessed through UWC, and in particular through your eCanva username and password. If you have not used Kikapu before, when you log in, it will tell you, when you log in for the first time, it will verify your credentials and create an account for you automatically. So in my case, what we're going to do is we're going to log in. Before we log in, my apologies, let's just have a look at the front page quickly. So at the top, so the image is the Great Hall and the clock, which now seems to be working, at least at this time. So we have a browse button in which you can search. So log in at the top. You'll note that as far as Kikapu is concerned, we do not have a button for register. This is not necessary. Okay, at the bottom, towards the middle of the screen, we can discover research from the University of the Western Cape. What you can see is with regard to all of our records, we have had 48,000 views, 48,500 views. The records have been downloaded 11,475 times. And let's just have a look at the statistics quickly. So the stats that I'm showing you now are available for the entire repository. However, you can create statistics for individual records as well. On the left, we have our user groups, and you can select a particular group. In this case, let's try COVID-19. You can select a time frame. So this could be weekly, monthly, yearly, or you can select specific dates. At the top, you'll see these records have been viewed 318 times and downloaded once. Excuse me. That is for the relevant dates. At the bottom of the graph, you'll see the number. So the number of views are in blue, the number of downloads are red. And as you can see, as far as the activity for the graph is concerned, between the 24th of October and the 30th of August, my apologies, we've had a spike in views, but only one download. However, if we change that and go back 1 week, you'll see the graph is a little bit different. So this is how we, as far as the data is concerned, or the stats are concerned, this is how they are presented with regard to Kikapu. And as you can see, you do not have to log in to get these statistics. At the bottom, we have a map. And this indicates where the data has been viewed and whether or not it's been downloaded. So in this case, it's been viewed 69 times in Alaska. As far as China is concerned, 28 views. In South Africa, it says 2 views. Bear in mind, this is related to the date that we've added to the repository. that we've added in terms of the, sorry, that we've added in terms of the time frame that we're looking at. At the bottom, we have some highlights with regard to individual records and the number of times that they've been viewed. You can review the top groups and the top categories. You can view the item types as well as top referrals. Okay, so as far as the data is concerned, an interesting amount of data can be collected. So let's go back to the home page. Okay, so that was the statistics over here. At the bottom, we have a list of the records. These are just normal tiles. So here we have all of the records. Here we have specific categories. Here we have groups, and then there's the search option as well. We have the option of changing the view as well. As Sarah indicated, in terms of uploads to Kikapu, in this case, we have a media upload, and this one is an audio upload, which is a radio interview with Professor Fielding. In this case, we have a data set that has been uploaded. Here we have a text document has been uploaded. And in this case, we have an online resource. So in other words, a record that is not where the metadata has been loaded, but not the actual file. The link to the file has been uploaded here. In this case, I believe this one is also a radio interview. Towards the bottom, we also have presentations. Here we have the open access presentation, and here we have an earlier version of, an earlier video that was created by Sarah. Okay, so let's get to the other part. Okay, so at this stage, what you do is to log in. And as I indicated earlier, if this is your first time, the program will create an account for you. Okay, there is a question. There are some comments in the repository. There are some comments in the chat. We'll get to them soon. I just want to get onto the platform at the moment. So as far as the logging in is concerned, you enter your eKamba username and password, and you click login. In my case, I have an account. And I should say at this stage, I'm the administrator for this platform. But anyone else who is logging in or creating an account for the first time, as indicated, the accounts get created as you log in. You don't have to do anything else beyond that. Okay, from my side, one of the things that you will see when you upload first is your details at the top. This one would be me. And then at the top, you also have 4 different tabs. One is your data, which is all of your data that you've uploaded. The next one is individual projects that you may have created. Projects are essentially folders where your data gets uploaded. You can identify your different collections that you participate in, and you can also have a look at the activity. The activity records the number of times your records have been accessed, and it can tell you whether or not your records have been downloaded. Okay, excuse me. So moving forward, one of the things that we suggest if you are uploading data for the first time is that you create a research project. So you select projects, and what you can do is you can create a new project by selecting create a new project. As you can see, we've got a few. Creating a new project is essentially creating a folder. At the top, you would include your title. So at the bottom, you can add a description. This description can be an abstract for a paper or a research project, or the broad description of the actual project itself. If you're creating data data records with regard to a group project, your description of the project itself goes in here. And we'll just stick to that for now. on the right, you'll see project owner. And so that would be me. Here, what you can do here is you can also search by name and add individual people. At the bottom here, you can click and invite new users. In terms of inviting a new user for an individual student who is looking at creating a project for, or is planning on uploading data for a thesis, it is important to invite your supervisor, however many there may be. And in order to do that, what you can do is you add the email address, username, email address, identify the role of the person. And in this case, your supervisor will actually be a collaborator. You can identify viewers as well who will not be able to interact with the data. They can read it, but they will not be able to add anything to the file. Okay? And of course, you can add a message here. Once you have added the message, you can send an invitation to someone. That invitation will allow, so either the person will accept or decline the invitation, but the invitation, if they choose to accept it, will allow them access to the project record. Okay. Scrolling down. As far as your funding is concerned, you can add your funding details, either the grant number, for example. You can add multiple grants if you choose to, or multiple funding sources, but it is important to make sure that your funder, if you are not self-funded, is identified. Of course, if you are self-funded and you choose to identify yourself as self-funded, you can do that as well. As far as the projects are concerned, the type of projects that we suggest is to create an individual project. And the reason for that is it helps identify a quota in terms of the storage facility. This, for example, can give you anything from a terabyte to 2 or 3 terabytes, and you can apply for more data, for more space if you need to. What is important about this process, though, is that you are allocated a default amount of data of space at the beginning. It does have an impact on whether the storage facility does have an impact on whether or not you can store your research data. If you have exceptionally large research volumes of data that comes in terabytes, maybe, what will happen in a case like that is that we will suggest that you create a metadata only record, and we will get to those soon. As far as the privacy statement is concerned, you can apply the setting after you've published content with regard to the project. So in other words, your project and your metadata will be public until you indicate that you would like something to be private or kept private. In this case, what we would do then is we would click Save Changes, and it would create a new project. So in my case, I'm going to save changes, and it will create a project automatically. So the title comes up. And in order to add new material, you would click Add a New Item. You can also add a note or a document or a generic comment with regard to the project itself. So before we move forward, what I'd like to do, so we've now discussed creating a project. So before we move forward, I'd just like to have a look at the chat quickly in case anyone has any questions.
I've been responding to most of the questions coming through, but have a look at them and see if you want to add anything.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Okay, no, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Thank you. With regard to Marie, should the data be made publicly available? Please note that the data on the data records or the default setting on Kikapu is private. And until such a time that the data is deemed or sanitized to the extent that it is deemed publishable, then then the data can be made public. Up until that stage, which may not necessarily happen quickly, but up until that stage, all the data will be regarded as private and will not be made available publicly. As far as the data record is concerned, there may be a record of the data, but it's not necessarily going to, but the actual data set or files will not be made available. Thank you, Sarah. That helps. The roles of the librarians, Sibiwe, I'm a librarian. I am the administrator of this platform. As far as the roles of librarians are concerned, not the easiest question to answer. We help people figure out, for example, what it is, what research data management is, why it is important, and how to conduct and how to manage the data itself. As far as the platform is concerned, this librarian is the administrator of this platform. Let's see. There was a comment with regard to the High Degrees Committee, centralized data management system. Yes. Okay. So with regard to the comment with regard to the Higher Degrees Committee, I did the presentation at the Higher Degrees Committee. The university research data management policy, which was officially adopted in April of this year, or May, indicates that a data management plan is required, and that with regard to any research project conducted under the management or under the auspices of the institution, or in relation or with some kind of relationship with the institution. So whether or not you're a student or an academic or an administrator doing some kind of registered research project, either within the institution or under the banner of the institution, then a data management plan is required, as well as and the data itself needs to be stored in an appropriate way. So Kikapu is one of the places where you would store your research data. As far as the Higher Degrees Committee is concerned, students are now required to create a data management plan for all research being conducted, as well as store their research data in an appropriate way. We did go through that with regard to the previous webinar, but we will be discussing that again at various intervals. Please bear in mind that you can always contact us directly as well, if you have any questions. Okay, I need to proceed. So thank you, Sarah. Moving forward. Okay, so as far as research data is concerned, adding a new item, once you've created your project, is as simple as selecting a new project. So selecting add a new item, and your metadata screen, or the record that the screen that will come up, is your metadata record. This record is a description of what you are going to store, or the records that you plan to store. What is important is to fill in as much detail as possible, so that your research data can be made as clearly as accessible, can be as clear as possible. So at the top, what you can do is either upload the file or drag and drop a record into the file at the top. Just below, you'll see an option that says metadata record only, and on the right, you'll see a link file. What is important about these records, this part of the metadata, is this is essentially for data that has been harvested elsewhere. So in other words, if your project, for example, is collects data or is analyzing data from the City of Cape Town municipality, for example, then you don't harvest the data, you don't harvest the original, then you're not collecting data. What you're doing is you are harvesting or collecting data from an existing data set. And in this case, what you would do is you select metadata record only, and you can have a description of the actual data itself, as well as include a link with regard to the data. So link file, for example, here is where you can add a URL as well. At the top, if you are if your data is with you, so in other words, you have a Excel file or some form of data set, and bear in mind the data set can be multiple, can be many different things, then the file gets uploaded here. If, for example, you're in the astrophysics department and the kind of data that you're working with is so huge that that you cannot necessarily download it or create an individual file, then you would also link a record to this data set. So in other words, you would identify the location of the original file or of the original data. And in which case you will then create a metadata only record. So for today, what we're going to do is I'm going to upload an image, which will be my data set or my data record. So today, I'm going to upload the JPEG image, and then we're going to describe it. So the title would be the description of the record. So as far as the author is concerned, your name will come up automatically. If there are multiple authors, you can add individual people as well. Please bear in mind that the tips on the left, all of the little green dots, if your intention is to publish the data set, the little green dot indicates a field that is required. Otherwise, as far as if you are not going to publish the data set, which is the case in most cases, at least up until a curatorial workflow has been done. I'll explain that a bit later. So for the most part, you need to fill in all of the information here in order to make sure that the data set is as complete as possible. The categories that we're going to select, here we've got different categories. These are default categories that were created by Figshare or by the platform, by the program developers. These are broad categories, and within these there are minor categories as well. So within social science, for example, there is, in this case, we'll go with early childhood development. You can create multiple categories as well. So so the best thing to do is to create as many as possible that do provide, that describe your project as closely as possible. Just bear in mind, I'd like to draw your attention to the little box here. When it comes to the data set that's been created, bear in mind that you can add multiple files to one record. So for example, if you have the actual data, and in addition to that, you have a document that describes your data and describes how you used it, this may even be as simple or complicated as a document that describes your research methodology. Those can be added here as well. So a metadata file can contain multiple, so a metadata record can contain multiple files. So going back, as far as the categories go, that's done. You now select your research group. As far as the research groups are concerned, we have the University of the Western Cape as a large group. Then we have each faculty is represented. So we have arts, we have dentistry, we have EMS, we have education, law, natural sciences. At the bottom, we have UWC Creative Works. We'll discuss that at the end of this presentation. And then the UWC Library has a number of data sets that we've made available as well. These are all library related projects. These also include documents as far as webinars and so on are concerned that we have uploaded onto the platform. So as far as the groups are concerned, let's see, we've selected the category in the social sciences. So we'll select community and health sciences as a group. Here we'll indicate the type of item. It is important to identify the type of item because as far as the Figshare is concerned, we can actually search different types of items together. So in this case, we have figure, media, dataset, poster. We have journal contribution, which may be an abstract or a normal manuscript. It could be the actual journal article itself. We have presentations, we have theses, we also have software. As far as the item types are concerned, this is a clear indication of the different types of documents that can be uploaded. So what we're going to have a look at here is figure, and then we're going to include keywords. Please note that keywords go in one at a time, and a keyword is either a single word or a short phrase of no more than 2 or 3 words. Also, it is important to include as many keywords as possible. If in the case of your research data, one of the things that you need to do is to make sure that you include the country. You can also include the city. And you can also include the district. Beyond that, you may include things like adolescents, for example. You can include economic conditions. But the idea is to make sure that you have as many keywords as possible. It is important to approach the metadata record in such a way that with the understanding that it contains phrases and words and keywords that will help someone find the data online or within Kikapu itself. That, of course, is once it's published. Your description would be, as far as if it's a dissertation, you would include your abstract. If it's a figure or a data set, you'd include a description of the data set, how it was being used, why it was collected in the first place, and you could indicate what you hope to achieve by it. If your document you're going to add is a journal contribution, like a manuscript, for example, you can include the abstract of the manuscript as well. It is important to remember that your description needs to be as extensive as possible, as it will contain the most information with regard to describing the project itself, the data set. You can include your funder. You can also add another grant as well. As indicated with the projects, you can add multiple funders and multiple grants as well. Your resource title is something that you can include. This would be a resource linked to the data set. Your resource DOI. If your data set is linked to a published document, you can include the digital object identifier of the published record. In the case of journals such as PLOS one of the things that they try to do, or they try to encourage, is to have authors indicate where the research data is, from which the article has been generated, or which supports the research or conclusions drawn in a particular article. What this then means is that as far as your research data is concerned, if you have written an article, let's say to PLOS and they've accepted, they are going to ask you for your DOI, because they would need access to the research data to verify your conclusions. You may include references. And then as far as the licenses are concerned, these are the licenses, or the Creative Commons licenses that Sarah mentioned earlier. The most common license is CC BY, and the reason for that is that the basic license indicates that if someone does share your research data, that they do need to, or use your research data, that they do need to attribute you. So in other words, that you need to be cited. And this is one of the important aspects with regard to research data. It can now be published in such a way that, that it can improve your citation count. So as far as your data is concerned, it is important to describe it clearly. It is important to make sure that the data is publishable. So in other words, POPIA compliant, and that you have permission, of course, to publish the data itself. And if you do choose to publish the data and we go through the curatorial process, what happens then is a DOI is assigned and it gets published on this platform. What then happens is if someone uses your data, they will then cite you. Okay, as far as the licenses are concerned, there are many different types of licenses. In this case, the CC-BY is the attribution license. So it says, please, if you use my data, please cite me. In this case, CC0 basically means that if you use my data, you can do anything that you like with it. And you do not necessarily have to cite me. Moving forward towards the bottom, NC means non-commercial. So what this means is you allow people to use your data, but it cannot be used for commercial purposes. In this case, what this means is that NCND means non-commercial and no derivatives. What this means then is that you allow people to use your data for non-commercial purposes, but they cannot alter your data in any way or create a derivative of the data itself. So more information about the Creative Commons licenses are available online. You're also welcome to contact us at the library and we will explain those to you. For now though, the CC-BY license is most appropriate. Also bear in mind that it is a license that you as a researcher issue. It is not a license that you subscribe to and it's not something that you pay for. So moving forward, here you can see the metadata required for publishing is missing. So let's just have a look. We've done all of that at the top. So there's some other details a little bit further down that are missing. What we need to do is to look at the details at the bottom. So moving forward, apply an embargo. In this particular case, you can indicate, for example, that you would like your data to be kept private for a particular period of time. So for the university, for example, we would allow, generally, we would allow a 12-month period of privileged or exclusive use after the conclusion of the project. So if a student, for example, has written a dissertation for 12 months after the graduation date, we can allow the data to remain closed or remain private, assuming that the data is publishable. What is important as far as embargo dates are concerned is an embargo date is simply a countdown. So what this means is that we can add a date, and in terms of so we would select period, so it could be month, 12 months, 1 year, etc. Here we can indicate a specific date, and at the bottom, files only, or on the entire content. So here we can keep the file itself private, or we can keep the entire record private. And then of course here, while the file's under embargo, we need to indicate what kind of, we need to make some kind of, provide some kind of reason as to why the record is under embargo. The embargo itself, however, is a countdown. So from the day that it gets embargoed, the clock with regard to the repository, so Kikapu, will essentially count down the number of days. At the end of that period, the file will be opened automatically and it will become public. It is important to be aware of the fact that when it comes to the files, we do need to make sure that the records can be made public, because the embargo process is essentially an automated one. Okay, so we're not going to do that now. Generate a private link. Private links are direct links to the specific record. In this particular case, what is important to remember is that a private link is something that you would use to share your record with specific people. So in other words, you can share your record with your supervisor, you can share your record with co-supervisors, you can share your record with co-researchers or colleagues, and you can share your record with individuals who you personally believe are interested in them, but this is not a public link. So in other words, only people with this link will be able to access the data. Your research, your digital object identifier. If your intention is to publish your data, then you can reserve a DOI. So in other words, you indicate your intention that you intend to publish the data itself, and this will be done. So a DOI, for example, will be made available temporarily. I hope I can show you an example of what it would look like. Okay, so this is the DOI for this particular record. It is not a permanent one, at least not until the record itself is published, and it will not become active until the item itself is published as well. If you choose to have your record published, so there are a couple of options. So at the bottom here, we have delete item. So in other words, we can delete this entire record. And then at the bottom, we have a couple of, so at the end of the record, we have cancel, DOI, create a private link, apply an embargo, and then publish. So here, what we need to do, what we can do here is, if you're going to publish this record, you click publish, and you select publish item. Once a record is published, this is not the stage at which the record itself is published. What will happen is that a publishing notice will go to the administrator's desk. So in other words, my desk, and it will tell me that a particular researcher is interested in having their data published or their data record published. What we will then do from our side is we will review the data, we will consult with your supervisor or your principal investigator or your group advisor, as well as cross-reference it with the POPI Act, for example. We may be discussing it with the research directors or your deputy dean of research, to the extent that we are satisfied that the data itself may be made available publicly, in which case then the data gets published. At this stage, however, if you click the button publish item, it does not go anywhere. Okay. At this stage though, so we're not going to publish the record, we're just going to save changes. And a record of this nature, even though it will be visible, is in fact regarded as private. So this record, for example, will not be made available publicly. Because I am logged in, it might show up, but on a public platform, you will not be able to see this record. So especially if you're not signed in, and especially if you're not signed in as me, me. Okay, does anybody have any questions with regard to the uploading of the data set? Let's see. Sarah, thank you. That clears that up. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to open the floor and allow people to raise their hands if you choose to. So we're going to stop sharing. So does anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand and we will we'll try and address your question if we haven't done so in the chat. Okay, it looks like we've not entirely sure whether or not we should say that we've been completely successful because no one's asking any questions, other than people who have who've made comments in the chat. Okay, well,
can I quickly jump in here for a second? There's been quite a good discussion about POPIA and open access, and there seems to still be a little bit of confusion. So I think Mark and I will definitely have something that we can offer everyone with some training on open access and POPIA. But in a nutshell, the important things to take away from them is that POPIA is about personal information, and open access is about sharing. And they don't need to compete with each other at all. And their processes are being arranged at the moment with research ethics committees and whatnot. And your supervisors, if you're concerned about personal information, your supervisors are the ones to speak to at the moment.
Thank you, Sarah. I see Lisa has a question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. And is it Mark? Sorry, it just says,
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, hi, Mark. So I'm a supervisor, and I'm sitting here, like, I've been asking a lot of questions, and some of my colleagues and I have been chatting on WhatsApp as well. So I certainly, in our community and health sciences faculty, I would say, and I don't think I'm wrong because I serve on the research committee, other colleagues serve on the higher degrees committee, I would say that I think there's a lot of confusion right now within our faculty, because I hear what you're saying, Sarah, but on the one hand, we're being inundated with popular stuff. And on the other hand, we're now hearing all of this about open access. In our faculty, we work a lot with qualitative data as well. So when you're working with a large quantitative data set with 1,000, you know, if you've a huge data set like that, it's very easy to anonymize stuff. With qualitative, where perhaps you might have as few as 3 or 5 participants, it's not as easy. So I think there's a lot of conflict in my mind. And then I think we've been asked to do things like data management plans. On the one hand, we have to respect POPIA. On the other hand, we must come with open access stuff. I, as a supervisor, I wouldn't know where to start advising my students on this.
Can I quickly jump in there, Lisa? With open access, it's by no means is trying to force all researchers to make things completely open. As open as possible, as closed as necessary, that little phrase is really the crux of it. So if for example, if they're interviews and they're audio transcripts and there are only 5 people, then of course that would be a violation of confidentiality, and that wouldn't be made public. So it's where data and data sets can safely be made accessible, then it's highly encouraged. But otherwise, they can be made private, complete like that. Nobody's going to argue with making a data set private because there is that kind of information in it.
Yes, Sarah's right. As far as open access is concerned, no, open access open access is more related to the research output in terms of publishing material. So in other words, books, book chapters, articles, conference papers, and so on. And for that part, the idea is to make sure that research is spread or is made as widely accessible as possible. So open access is not directly related to research data in terms of forcing people to make research data available publicly. That is a different conversation. Also, we need to bear in mind that as much as POPIA has been on the let's say, in the works for probably 2 or 3 years now. The Act itself has only become available in July this year. And many people are seeing the details of the Act for the first time. What that means then is that as far as universities go, researchers and even retailers for that matter, the conversation with regard to how we treat research data and what exactly is confidential and what is not, those conversations have basically just started. It is also important to remember that the university has a POPIA compliance unit that's just come off the ground. And as an institution, we're still discussing how we deal with data. One of the examples that I can give you is that as far as the UWC Library is concerned, we have access to far more data than what people realize. So when a student, for example, registers to use the library, it's clear to us what that person's details are. their personal address, their ID numbers, details of their parents or guardians, or spouse for that matter. And the reason why the data becomes available to us is because the library platform is integrated with SASE. Obviously, this also is not only applicable to students, it is also applicable to staff who register as library users. So as the library, we're also deeply entrenched in the conversations when it comes to POPIA compliance. One of our deputy directors, for example, is on this committee where the university really needs to engage with how we deal with data. So as far as health data is concerned, I have always cautioned students to not make health data available publicly. We have had cases in the past where one or two supervisors from the community of health sciences have said that students have gone out into communities where they've collected data from clinics or hospitals or some kind of health service. And then those institutions have come back to make sure that the data, and with questions to make sure that the data itself is private and is not in the possession of the student. So those are the questions that we are trying to address. But as far as the research data is concerned, and as far as let's say the dissertations are concerned, for example, if a dissertation can be written in such a way that it can be made public, but the data itself that supports that document is not necessarily going to be made public. We had a case earlier in the year, and after a graduation ceremony where a dissertation in theology had such a small pool of research subjects that the dissertation itself could not be made public. We have a copy of it, but it is not available on the repository. So if your concern, for example, is publishing information with regard to, let's say, publishing information as a dissertation, where the research pool is that small, you can certainly voice your concern and we will address it appropriately. And by that, I actually mean we will keep the dissertation out of public hands or often public platforms. So as far as the research data is concerned, and particularly with regard to health sciences, the best way to deal with it currently is to make sure that the data is safe and secure. Once the project has been concluded, we actually need to make sure that the student doesn't have the data in their possession, because technically speaking, it would be illegal. Also, it is important to remember that when it comes to research data, internationally, the accepted norm is that the university owns the data. The reason for that is essentially to protect the data subjects as well as the researcher. So in other words, if anything, heaven forbid, happens as far as the research data is concerned, the university has a form of protection available that an individual researcher may not have. So as far as the supervision of a project is concerned, where a pool of data subjects is really small or the data is qualitative, essentially qualitative in nature, what we're trying to encourage is that the data is stored securely, and then we'll go into a long conversation about how to sanitize the data and make sure that the data does not become public in some way, especially when it's not allowed, or it's illegal, or it's in contravention of the POPIA Act. And once all of that has been hashed out, then we'll make a decision. And the decision at the end of the day is probably going to be 50-50. So either the data can become public, or it needs to be kept under wraps. I realize that's a fairly lengthy discussion or response, but that is the position that we're in currently. So as far as community and health sciences are concerned, and as far as health related data is concerned, I would say proceed with caution and rather ask first so that we can have a discussion about it before making anything public. I really hope that helps somewhat. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Anyone else? Lisa's mentioned this data storage and disposal of data. As far as the data repository is concerned, yes. What we will do is we will look at destroying research data after a period of 5 years. The norm is to store data for 5 years, unless otherwise stipulated. There are cases where data needs to be kept for longer, and there are cases where data needs to be destroyed after a very short period of time. As far as destroying research data is concerned, there is a process. It is not as simple as just clicking the delete button. We do need to make sure that all traces of it are gone or removed from the record. And on top of that, what will happen is the metadata record will remain available. So in other words, it will remain public. However, the metadata record will indicate that this data has been destroyed or has reached the end of its life cycle. So there are various steps that we do need to go through, but it is something that we haven't done yet, but it's something that will be necessary soon enough. Okay.
Can I also quickly mention that the data management plans, the DMPs, so Lisa, this is really relevant to you at CHS. The DMP is going to become a part of the research ethics approval stage. And within the DMP, the consent forms are going to need to be included. So the way it's being arranged is that there really will be no way that confidential information will be able to leak out into research data that'll be published. We're not going to push for any research data to be published until we absolutely know that it's safe and POPIA compliant. I hope that puts your mind at ease a little.
Also bear in mind that these conversations are continuing within the institution as well. Not only UWC, pretty much all of the research institutions and universities are having the same problem. So that's the current position. So are there any other questions? Okay, so if not, please bear in mind that you are welcome to contact us at any time. We'll try and answer your questions as best as we can. The recording will be made available soon. It takes a bit of time for the recording to be collected on the Zoom website. So once that's ready, we'll make it available. Please note that as far as these recordings are concerned, we do try and load them into Canva as well. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. That was, I think we've had a successful session, and we're looking forward to the next one. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice day.
Thank you.